This is Distant Replay, the podcast that goes back in time to relive all the greatest events that we witnessed in sports. From upsets, to championships, to cultural moments, we discuss it all. Coming up on today's episode.
Taking you back to March 26th, 1979. That is the day of the NCAA Tournament Championship between Indiana State and Michigan State, a game that's really kind of a legendary game that many talk about. Is Bird versus Magic, Magic versus Bird, however you prefer to say it. And it was kind of the start of that pretty incredible rivalry between two of the all-time greats to ever play basketball. Welcome into Distant Replay. I am Ben George, along with Mike Noto, to go back to this game. What are you talking about here now, Mike? Almost a little over 40 years ago. Pretty hard to believe, but this is a game that I've never seen before. I'm assuming you hadn't either.
This is my first time seeing it. Saw a lot of the other Magic versus Bird classic games, throughout, watching games over the years, but never this one.
So I'm interested to get your thoughts on this game as we go through it, because this is unique for both of us, because I don't know that we've done, there might be one or two games we've done that we have never seen before. But we're going back to 1979 in an era of college basketball that was completely different with the sport itself. But then outside of that, the tournament was different amount of teams, seeding was different. There's a lot about this that was different than what we're accustomed to. So we'll go through all that today on the show. You can find this show in its entirety online, or this game in its entirety online, at distantreplaypodcast.com. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we are on YouTube. Thanks to everybody that has subscribed to the show. Please continue to spread the word. If you haven't subscribed, we would greatly appreciate that. That helps us continue to grow the show. All right, where to start, Mike? I think for me, I want to start with the NCAA tournament, because I thought this was really unique because it's so different than what we're used to. And you go back to this tournament in 1979, I don't know what stood out to you most, but I think to me, having NBC Sports covering this, I don't know what I thought, but I thought CBS had the contract forever.
Not only that, but we're talking NBC before the Peacock.
Yeah, I don't recognize the logo.
That threw me off, because at first I said, man, I thought their microphone cover said NBC. And then when they showed the logo, I'm like, there's no Peacock. But then they said, they would later clarify it's NBC Sports. But that threw me for a loop as well, especially since Billy Packer was on the call.
Yeah.
And you equate him with being, CBS through and through. So.
And Dick Enberg. I think of him mainly as CBS. I guess he's been kind of all over the spectrum, but I think of him a lot as CBS. So the other thing that's interesting about this, there's 40 teams in this tournament. This is the first time they did 40 teams, and the last time they did 40 teams. They were in the middle of expanding. They would go to 48 the next year, but they had 4 regions, like we're accustomed to, seeds 1 through 10, but seeds 7, 8, 9, and 10 had to basically play play-in games to get into the second round. Everybody else got buys into the second round. So that in itself, again, very unique.
For sure. And then basically that led to these teams, from my count, having to win one less game to win the championship.
Yep. Yeah,
than today. Than today.
Yeah, and the seeds in this, so you had, in this bracket, you had Michigan State was a 2 seed actually, but Indiana State was a 1. Indiana State had not lost all season, by the way, which was something I didn't realize. I knew they were good, but I wonder what the hype was for them going into this tournament, because they were the 1 seed, they were undefeated. I don't know if it was because you look at their schedule, they didn't play a whole lot of teams, so I don't know what that hype was. But you had Notre Dame as a 1, North Carolina, and UCLA. So you had 2 powerhouses. Notre Dame can come and go. Digger Phelps, the head coach. Then Indiana State out of nowhere.
Yeah, and I think Indiana State had a decent amount of publicity heading into this season because of Larry Bird and because of the fact that he was actually drafted number 6 overall in the 1978 draft by the Celtics, but he decided to come back for a senior season.
Whoa,
the
I didn't know
NBA
that.
later, what was that?
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, the NBA later, of course, changed that rule, right? Basically, with the rule changed the fact that you could draft players before they wanted to sign in the league and kind of hold their rights. But the NBA changed that rule that allowed players to be drafted before they wanted to sign. So that's why you hear now guys declaring for the draft. So
Okay.
Bird didn't even declare for the draft, but he was drafted by a Red Auerbach and the Celtics, number 6. They basically took the risk and said, well, if he doesn't want to come, that's fine. We'll have the rights to him, after his senior season. So I think that's why Indiana State had a decent amount of publicity heading into the season and throughout the whole regular season, especially as they, built that undefeated record like you talked about.
The other thing about this tournament, this was the first tournament in which all the teams were seeded by the committee. That had never happened before. So, the way we think about this was brand new this year. So there's a lot of firsts going into this year in this tournament. It was kind of a different time, a different era, but they ended up with, I guess, a championship game that they couldn't have scripted any better when you look back on it now. So let's look at these two teams a little bit, Mike. Michigan State, obviously led by Irvin Magic Johnson, one of the all-time legends. And I look back at Michigan State's team. We're accustomed to them being really good now, but they weren't the, I guess you could consider them a blue blood at this point after 40 years of playing at the level they have. But this is their first national championship ever. So this is kind of a program, not like Indiana State, but still kind of an up-and-comer.
Yeah, and look, they were very fortunate that Magic Johnson was from very local to the East Lansing campus and wanted to stay in state and go to Michigan State. They were just very fortunate with that, put them on the map. Judd Heathcote would become a legendary coach at Michigan State. He coached all the way up till 1995. And I think they said he was 50 years old coaching this game. So shows you how long he was there and how old he was when he retired. I mean, they went right from Judd Heathcote to Tom Izzo.
Yeah.
It's
nuts.
And then as far as Michigan State's players go, the only other player I remember and had heard of other than Magic Johnson is Gregory Kelser. So I remember Greg Kelser only because I've seen profiles of this game a lot, although I hadn't seen the whole thing. And Kelser was like, at that point, as they mentioned, the leading scorer in school history. So those are the only two names besides the coach, Judd Heathcote, that I even recognize.
Yeah, I didn't recognize anybody else on the roster and really anybody else on the court itself. You're going back quite a ways. But there were a couple of international guys. I think somebody from St. Croix. Was it St. Croix?
St. Thomas or St. Croix, and there was a guy from Canada.
Canada. Yeah. So who knew Michigan State had the international reach they did back in the day. But, you even look back through their schedule or through their team. They reached the Elite Eight the year before, but before that, they didn't have a tournament appearance since 58, 59. So it's not like obviously the tournaments were smaller, but still they didn't have nearly the success we're accustomed to where they're in the tournament every single year, and you kind of write them into the second weekend essentially. But that was them. And Judd Heathcote, as you mentioned, a legend. But I look back at his career, Mike, and I wonder if he was around today, would he have survived in Michigan State? He had that. So this is year 3 for him. So first year, 12-15, second year, Elite Eight, third year, national championship. Okay. I think we're safe to say we credit that to Magic Johnson. From there, he went on to win 12 games, 13 games, 12 games over the next 3 years, all losing records. Then went to the NIT 4 years later. 5 years later, didn't make another tournament. He didn't get back to the NCAA tournament for 6 years. So I kind of wonder, in this day and age, is he a guy who's now, as you mentioned, is a legend, would go on to still do some good things, never have the success he had in 78, 79. But I wonder if he'd even been around.
I think he benefited by winning that national championship early. By having Magic Johnson the 2 seasons he did, by them being 25-5 and 26-6 respectively, winning the national championship. I think he kind of rode that wave until, like you said, 6 years later, 7 years later, they'd make the Sweet 16 again. But they would never really be, if you look at his record, they were never really a consistent winner again until like the last 6 years of his career.
Right. Yeah,
so that is eye-opening once you just really break down his career. And if you bring up a good point, would he have lasted that long? I don't think maybe Michigan State, them being competitive was good enough for them back then. Maybe they weren't at the blue blood level they are now. Now I don't think, like if Izzo was ever to leave and the guy who replaced him had a 4 or 5 year span like Michigan State had when after this national championship, I don't think that coach would survive a span like that.
Yeah, definitely a different day and age for sure. But yeah, I thought that was interesting to see because you think back on him, that's a guy right? This guy that's kind of a legend. When he passed away in 2017, Izzo talked about his kind of iconic status and how much he meant to the Michigan State program. We took back at his career, and it's really good, but it's still like it doesn't scream like one of the all-time greats. But still, he had incredible run here, 78-79 season. On the other side, we've got the Indiana State Sycamores. This Indiana State team, again, all built around Larry Bird. Larry Bird, the senior, you kind of detail his lead into this. And this team didn't play anybody throughout the season. I mean, they played a Purdue team, but this Purdue team wasn't ranked. The rest of their schedule, man, is pretty bad. This is one of those where I think if the team went undefeated with this record now, they may even not even get a 1 seed in the tournament.
Yeah, people thought that, remember when St. Joe's went undefeated?
Yeah.
People thought they had a soft schedule, but they played in the A-10. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, this Indiana State team had an even, weaker schedule. One thing I found interesting is their coach, Bill Hodges, was only 36 years old.
Yeah.
Which I thought was interesting. He never coached at a major school throughout his whole coaching career. Mm-hmm. Indiana State was like the best school he coached at, which I found interesting. You think a guy who coaches an undefeated team at age 36, that may lead to a bigger job.
Right.
But it didn't for him. The Indiana State jerseys are absolute fire.
You love that blue, don't you?
The blue with the state of Indiana as the eye.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. Awesome. Now, Bird, interesting story, obviously. Ben, I'm not sure if you're aware, he originally went to Indiana.
Right.
Was on campus at Indiana for the first semester of his freshman year. Just was like a fish out of water there. So he transferred out of Indiana, went back home to French Lick, worked as like a municipal worker, and went to a local community college for a year, and then ended up going to Indiana State. So just a very good story. We'll have to do like a Larry Bird documentary recap one of these days. There are some documentaries on him. Just lived a very interesting life, even becoming a member of the Celtics.
Yeah, and Hodges was the reason why he came over there. He recruited him after Indiana and got him over to the program. But yeah, I thought the career path for Hodges was interesting too. With he was only at Indiana State through '82, and then was at Long Beach State as an assistant, and then Georgia College, Mercer, and then he was even coaching up until 1999, Mike. Which, again, he's still alive. I mean, he's still 77, so it speaks to how young he was when this game. But he was coaching up until 20 years ago, which is crazy. That's already 20 years ago. But still, it just a kind of an interesting career path for him as head coach. And I have no idea why he left Indiana State, but a guy that got his team to the NCAA championship game and was gone 3 years later is pretty wild to me. Although you look at the record, and it was never anywhere close to what it was this one season with Larry Bird. So that's probably your answer. So that's Indiana State squad. And I thought what another interesting note from this Indiana State team, the beginning of this year, on November 20th, the Soviet national team came to Indiana State and played an exhibition. And Indiana State beat the Soviets 83-79, which they were only one of 4 college teams to beat them that season.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Where'd you unearth that from? What do you have, the yearbook for the 1979 Indiana State Sycamores?
The Soviet national team in 1979, bro. Think about that.
You think they played in 1979, especially, where that's a year from the Miracle on Ice?
Yeah. Can you imagine them coming through the States? I mean,
we're at the height of the Cold War.
I can't imagine what that crowd would have been like.
Especially in Indiana.
I want more on the 1979 Soviet team that was touring the U.S.
You think they were a fast break team or a half court type team?
I don't know. They were probably a fast paced team.
First of all, they were probably all between 25 and 35 years old playing against college kids. You know that.
Yeah, I know.
They didn't screw around. Their quote unquote amateurs were full blown pros.
I'm sure they weren't. They didn't play clean either. That's another guess.
You think they're dirty brand of basketball?
I don't know. Maybe just physical. I don't know. But that's a different story for a different day. But I thought that was a pretty interesting little nugget from this season for them. So that's the 2 teams leading into this. The tournament that year, just kind of get to this point, the Final Four and the championship game. You had a Michigan State team that went through Lamar, number 7 LSU, number 4 Notre Dame, and number 14 Penn in the Final Four. And this is a really, actually, when you look back on it, this is maybe one of the better runs to the tournament. And they didn't have a single game that was double digits, or single digits rather. And that Final Four game against Penn, they beat them by nearly 40 points.
Yeah. And so they went through it in this game, how Michigan State was just absolutely – they got off to a really rough start of the season, but that in the tournament they won 20 of their last 22 heading into the tournament, and like you mentioned, had a very good NCAA tournament and pretty much steamrolled through. Especially with that Final Four win against Penn.
Yeah, remarkable tournament there for Indiana State. They had Virginia Tech, number 16 Oklahoma. Then they got by number 5 Arkansas by 2, and then DePaul, number 6 DePaul, 76-74 in the semifinals. So they were sneaking by a couple teams there late. So a very good tournament run to get to the national championship for Indiana State. But what did you make of the Final Four? DePaul, Penn, Indiana State, and Michigan State.
So just of note, okay, this is still at the point where we have a consolation game.
Yeah.
So there was a third place game between Penn and DePaul. That's such like a CYO holiday tournament move, having a consolation game. Like you're guaranteed 3 games, so they got to fit in the consolation game so you could play. I just thought that was funny. But
you wouldn't want another third place game these days?
No, I don't think. You think the players would try? The players wouldn't even try. You know what I mean? That'd be the funny thing. But DePaul was really good back then. So we think of DePaul now. But this is at the point where DePaul's plucking quality recruits out of Chicago, and they're a top of the line program at this point. Penn obviously a surprise. I mean, they were a number 9 seed.
Yeah.
You went through there's only 1 through 10. They were a 9 seed and made it all the way to the Final Four.
Yeah, that was a heck of a run, and I was surprised seeing those teams when we got into the broadcast and they kind of went through it. Because again, I had zero background on this game going into it. Watched it fresh, then did some research afterwards. So thought that was pretty interesting. Anything pregame else to add, Mike, before we get into this broadcast? It's very interesting.
Yeah, let me see. So first of all, we're at the Special Events Center in Utah.
Yep.
Right, which is where the game's being played. So
Salt Lake City. Yep. Yeah,
in Salt Lake City. There's no 3-point line at this point. Something to keep in mind. There's no 3-point line. I think it has a major effect on the game, which we'll get to later.
It's huge, yeah.
Magic Johnson is wearing number 33, which is confusing because you equate Larry Bird with being number 33.
Yeah.
And Bird actually is forced to play center for this team because he's their biggest player, which I thought was interesting. Pretty
wild, right?
Yeah. But other than that, I think we're ready.
So we'll jump into this NBC Sports broadcast, and I'm going to put the one up there. There's a couple full games that are actually on YouTube, which surprised me because it's so hard to find games, earlier than 1990 even. But they had there's one game that actually has some pregame, and it's great. We got Dick Enberg, Al McGuire, and Billy Packer, and a young Bryant Gumbel, which was awesome. So it's this is it's a remarkable crew altogether.
Yeah, so Al McGuire is right off of in 1977 coaching Marquette to the national championship. So he's a very prominent name at this time. And it brought some great humor and basketball knowledge to the broadcast, which I thought was good. You had a more upbeat Billy Packer. Did you pick up on that?
Yeah,
he was a little more positive.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah,
the NBC Billy Packer was a little less ornery.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
And then, look, these guys, they didn't know it at the time, but they were announcing what would be, I think, what is still the highest-rated NCAA tournament game ever.
Yeah, it's crazy. This is one of the ones you always think about. This is a matchup that everybody kind of goes back to and relives from time to time. But in their open, it was very interesting because they featured. I guess Kenny Rogers, the Gambler, must have been a big song at the time. I don't remember what year it came out, but it must have been this year, obviously. But they did an intro, an open with Kenny Rogers, the Gambler. It came out in 1978. And then they spotlighted all the head coaches in the tournament, which I thought was really weird. That that was the story were the head coaches.
Yeah, college basketball long known for their head coaches, and the personalities. But even at this time, I mean, they highlighted Lou Carnesecca, Judd Heathcote. They had Dean Smith in there. All the big names with the Gambler playing in the background. So it was a little bit strange, but when you remember, hey, the Gambler was a huge song back then, I guess it makes sense.
Yeah, it was odd, but it works. But yeah, I mean, just to quickly hit on a few of the coaches that were in this tournament, because they did highlight a bunch of them. You had Digger Phelps at Notre Dame. You had Judd Heathcote, obviously. Del Brown at LSU. Lute Olson was at Iowa at this point. Bobby Crimmins was at Appalachian State at this point. You had Jim Valvano was at Iona, Lou Carnesecca. You had Jim Boeheim at Syracuse and John Thompson at Georgetown, Dean Smith. I mean, this was Eddie Sutton in Arkansas, Denny Crum at Louisville. I mean, you go down a list of
Loaded.
guys here.
Absolutely loaded.
Loaded.
And they would last for a long time.
Yeah.
A lot of those names you mentioned were still relevant in like the 90s and 2000s.
Yeah, which is nuts, right? I mean, you're talking about the 70s right now, the end of the 70s, but still, it's still crazy thinking like Jim Boeheim, right? I mean, this guy was coaching this tournament.
Syracuse. I can't believe he was at Syracuse that long ago.
That's wild to me. Like, I mean, I don't know. It's pretty crazy to look back on, but some absolute legends were a part of this tournament. And the other thing quickly about this tournament too, I don't know if you looked at the sites that they played in, but they had pretty traditional ones, but they had a site in Murfreesboro, Tennessee.
Yep.
On the campus of Middle Tennessee State. That seems crazy to me now. I don't know how big Murphy Center is, but you don't think of Murfreesboro as a site for any kind of big event.
Especially when you consider the other first, second round sites, right? It was like the Providence Civic Center, Assembly Hall in Bloomington, Indiana, Allen Fieldhouse in Kansas, Pauley Pavilion in LA, where UCLA plays, the McHale Center in Arizona. When you compare it to the other sites, you're right, it does stick out.
And then the Murphy Center in Murfreesboro. Anyway, so let's jump into it, Mike. I don't have a ton on this game. Like, I thought it was a good game, but like far from spectacular. The couple of the observations I had in this game. So I thought like a couple of things stood out to me. The rims were just tight as can be. It's like one of those rims that you'd find on like any kind of blacktop around the country. That no give, just hard as a rock.
Yeah. Have you ever played in an indoor gym that didn't have a breakaway rim?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what it was like. The one that's like nailed into the backboard and you could tell it's causing the ball to bounce out everywhere. That's the kind of rims we're talking about. You're right about that. The rims were tight as all can be, for sure. I thought in general, the lack of the 3-point line, like I mentioned before, just played a huge role in this game.
It did. It was interesting trying to watch the games because, you watch the defenses, and Michigan State played a really good zone defense. But you just saw them pack it in. I mean, it was just like, hey, we're going to dare anybody to shoot from outside of 10 feet or so because, like, I mean, there were some pretty good shooters in this, but we rarely saw a shot that would have been the distance of a 3-pointer now. I mean, there may have been like 3 or 4 of them all game. Yeah,
and, you really saw, you had a guy in Bird, right, who in this game became the 5th leading scorer in NCAA history. And it's crazy to think he didn't have the aid of a 3-pointer. And it's crazy to see Larry Bird not hoisting up shots from all over the place because I think that's what you think of him as when he became an NBA player. Just his wizardry with the ball, in terms of passing, and then his long-range shooting, I think is what you think of, and it was non-existent in this game. And primarily the reason for that was the whole defense focusing on him whenever he came anywhere near the lane.
Yeah, they were all over him. To be expected. I mean, they had a good game plan going in, and I'm sure everybody that played against Indiana State went in with the same game plan. But Michigan State had the guys to execute it and be successful that way. And I mean, Larry Bird played around the rim so much. I mean, most of his shots were close up. I mean, he had a few mid-range shots, but I mean, yeah, for the most part, it was around the rim and down in the paint. And I also thought the referees in this game, and we can maybe get to them a little bit more as we go along, but it's such an old school officiating. Like every call, I don't know if it's because it was a national championship, these guys were like jacked up, but every call was just exaggerated, like a Teddy Valentine. And then the old school way of calling the foul where you put your hand straight up in the air with the fist, and then like you point with like the flat hand down at the ground, like the foot of the player. That's how you signal a foul. That was what I saw all game. And like, I couldn't help but laugh every time I watched those guys signal a foul.
They signaled a foul like you're taught to in referee school. Like I used to ref basketball.
By the book.
Yeah, exactly, by the book. The refs in this game were terrible. Let's just call it what it is.
Yeah.
They were really bad. I mean, Magic Johnson picked up his 3rd foul late in the half. A lot of those were kind of ticky-tack kind of fouls. I was shocked to find out in this game he fouled out 5 times during the regular season.
Yeah, that's weird.
That seems like a crazy number for a point guard. But early on, you did get a glimpse of Magic Johnson on the fast break a couple times. But the flow of the game was really impacted by these referees. I think that's why you saw the score kind of be in the mid-60s like it was.
Yeah, they it seemed like they overshadowed the game. Even like watching now, like you could kind of pick that up, and all the broadcast team all kind of talked about it even more as the game went along and even late into this game. But it just felt like they were trying to kind of upstage what was happening. It kind of felt like that to me. Now, whether or not they were, who knows? But that's kind of that's the sense I got watching the game.
Yeah, me too. And another thing you picked up on was the referees and them wanting to make their mark, like you said, and just how man for man Michigan State was so much more athletic than Indiana State.
Yeah,
and that's what made that zone work. Is that when they're at full extension in the zone, it seems like they're all over the court because, like you said, they're kind of sinking into the middle, giving them the outside shot, and it just seemed like Indiana State had nowhere to go. They were just getting suffocated at every turn, and I think the only thing that kept them in the game was how closely the game was being called from a foul perspective. I got to ask you a question, Ben. What did you think about the fact that they were advertising that you could mail away for an NCAA program during the game?
I had that in my notes.
So they flashed on the screen several times during the game that you could send a $4 check to a certain address, and basically they would mail you back an NCAA program. Now we're dealing with a game that had very few graphics, but this is the one graphic they showed like 2 or 3 times. I found that hilarious. Like people used to just send checks and be like, oh, they'll send me back what I paid for. And writing out a $4 check is a wild move also.
A $4 check to a P.O. box in Lexington. That's where you're sending your money to get an NCAA program. But, I mean, if I had the opportunity now to send a $4 check and get a program back from a national championship, I'd probably do it.
It's worth the risk. It's worth the risk.
Inflation-wise, who knows what that might actually be today. But, that was a pretty wild move when I saw that as well. The first half, I mean, kind of back and forth early, but Michigan State, stretches the lead. They're even up 12 with about 3 minutes left in this half. They're playing, as you mentioned, like even with magic and foul trouble, still in control of this game. Another wild, crazy move in this game for me, broadcast-wise, was they had to pause for station identification. Like I've never, I don't think I've ever seen that on television before. That's a radio move for sure because you got to identify all your affiliates. But they stopped during the game during like the middle of a free throw to let stations identify themselves on TV.
Yeah, you're right. I equate that with like when I'm listening to a Mets game.
Right, you're in the car driving. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, on WFAN, but not with TV. That was another wild move. You're right.
Which speaks to the graphics because now you just have a watermark with the affiliate, right? So you couldn't identify, I guess, whatever station you were watching on back then. A couple of big plays in this one. There was a really good. I got a couple clips I got to get up on Instagram. One was, I think it was a Michigan State player that basically got his ankles broken, like a crossover or something, went sliding across the court on one of those plays. There was another one later in the game, which. We'll get to in the second half, but huge dunk. But there's a couple pretty good highlights. And then also Bird. I thought Bird played some pretty good defense. We saw like a flash of, I don't know if you thought about it, when he intercepted an alley-oop during one of these plays. And it reminded me of the play he made in Boston where he intercepts the pass and then is going out of bounds and finds a teammate. Like kind of a very similar kind of a foreshadowing what was to come in his career.
Yeah, that was a cool play. You're right. And Greg Kelser just started out hot, shooting and passing, and really carried Michigan State in the first half. He had a very good first half.
You love Greg Kelser.
I do. He had a good half. Leading scorer in Michigan State history. That shocked me when they said it.
Yeah, that is pretty nuts.
I'm a Greg Kelser guy.
Greg, yeah, you're officially a Greg Kelser guy now, starting today. 37-28 was their halftime score. Michigan State shot 52%, had 7 more rebounds than Indiana State. I mean, all the stats kind of pointed to what we saw. I mean, Michigan State was in control of this game. And, Indiana State, barring Larry Bird kind of going off, you just kind of felt like Michigan State's in control of this game and never really felt like Indiana State was the better team or really even threatening it most of this half.
Yeah, and I'll take it a step further. Like, I never felt the game was in doubt for Michigan State. After they went on that run and went up, coming out in the second half, they went on a 5-0 run to start the second half. Nope. And put them up 14, 42-28. And from that point, I thought it felt like that lead was insurmountable the way the game was going.
By the way, when did they stop doing jump balls for second half? I'm trying to remember if I remember this. This game had a jump ball to start the second half instead of just giving alternate possession. When did that start? Like, when did that change happen? Do you
Let's
remember?
put it this way. I've been following basketball and watching basketball very, very consistently since the late 80s, early 90s, and I can never remember a second half jump ball ever, even when I used to play.
Okay.
You know, when I used to play, it was alternate possession also. So you figure we probably both started playing basketball with rules and referees and stuff, like the early 90s?
Yeah, late 80s, early 90s.
I never remember that.
Never remember that. Like, okay, I'm glad I'm not alone. I just, when I saw that, I was like, when has this ever happened before where you had a jump ball to start a second half? But that's how we did it. As you mentioned, though, Michigan State came out on a run and it essentially put the game away. I mean, this half was a lot of Michigan State allowing Indiana State to kind of make some small runs and put a little pressure on them. But there was never a point in this half where I felt like this is going to be a classic finish.
No, you're right. I mean, there was a point where Indiana State cut it to 7 with under 6 minutes left. But then the play you alluded to before happened with Magic Johnson. That was a dunk and a half.
I mean,
it's probably the one highlight you see from this game. If you've seen a highlight from this game, Magic Johnson, that dunk sort of sealed it, and it was the play of the game.
See, I don't remember seeing that highlight. If I just missed it, I mean, is it shown a lot?
If you like I said, if you've seen highlights of this game, it's the one they always show.
Okay. I'm going to try to put that clip up there as well because, yeah, it was one of those dunks where even today, like, we've seen the athleticism today is so much better than it was back in 79. But that dunk today stands up with anything you'll see. And it was such a posterized.
Yeah, and I think it was, first of all, you hit it right on the head, posterized and a half. And then I think what really made it sink in was that's not the game you're used to Magic Johnson playing. He wasn't a high flyer, dunker kind of player. So when it happened, you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah. And I guess, too, Magic, he wasn't really known for his shooting. But, I mean, that was, I think, one of the big, questions, according to the broadcast, was his outside shot. Like, they talked about Indiana State kind of, giving that to him and seeing if he could beat him with it. But I didn't realize, maybe his game had not developed that much at that point.
Yeah, they were giving Larry Bird outside shots.
No.
So, of course, they'd be giving Magic Johnson outside shots. I mean, just the way the defensive strategy was in this game was just made the lack of a three-point line just makes the game so different. This is the first game we've done where there was no three-point line. And and there was no shot clock either, right?
See, I was trying to figure that out. I think there was.
Again, there's no graphics on the screen when we're watching this, guys. I don't want you to think like we're like not paying attention. There are zero graphics on the screen. They'd show the time clock every once in a while, but I don't think there was a shot clock.
I mean, I'm guessing there wasn't, but there was points in the second half where I was like, why isn't Michigan State just sitting on the ball if there's no shot clock here? And they would run some clock, but they would still, even in spots where I thought they could keep just passing around and moving the offense, they would actually attempt a shot. So I don't know for sure. We could obviously Google that, but
I got it, Ben.
I didn't know that. You couldn't tell by watching the game.
Yeah, I got it. So like you mentioned, there's a thing called Google where you could just find this information out. It's amazing. The 45-second shot clock started in 1985.
So no shot clock in this game.
No shot clock. Yep.
Which is wild. I would have thought they would have slowed it up a little bit more than they did, but yeah, they didn't have to, I guess. Another crazy thing about this broadcast was, we don't see a lot of credits in these games anymore. Like certain networks will see it, but they actually spent a full timeout, like the under 8 maybe, showing all the credits and giving the due to all this the crew that was working behind the scenes in this game, like full screen with like the shot of wide court of the shot in the background with just credits running for like 30 seconds or a minute.
Yeah, wasn't Enberg reading the names too?
He was. He's reading off a lot of them.
And then he read off a lot of names, and at the end, Al McGuire said, "Hey, anyone else you want to give credit to?" That was pretty funny. Al McGuire had some good one-liners during this game. He even lightened up Billy Packer, like I said before. So yeah, that's a feat in and of itself.
It was funny because they were criticizing the referees quite a bit down the stretch. Yeah, talking about how they just weren't having a good game, did not call a good game, and you don't hear that as much now. But I mean, I think it tells you how bad things got at this game at certain points. But Michigan State, despite some runs late in this game, Indiana State would kind of get it within 6 to 8. I don't think they're closer to 5 than 5.
No, I don't think they got closer than like 7. But what killed Indiana State, and they talked about it a lot during the game, was all the key players for Michigan State were in foul trouble. And Indiana State could not capitalize from the free throw line. That ended up being the difference in the game when all was said and done. It was 65-54 for a while. 61-54 for a while, and Indiana State couldn't break through. And during that stretch, it seemed like everyone on Indiana State was shooting besides Larry Bird.
Yeah, I know.
It was really strange. Guys, the fifth leading scorer has already been drafted in the top 6 by the Celtics, and he's not shooting the ball down the stretch for you. It just seemed a little bit surprising.
Yeah, bit of a surprise there, no question. But they would hold on, win this game in fairly comfortable fashion. 75-64, Michigan State would take home their first national championship, and we saw a good post-game interview with Heathcote and with Magic, asking him about whether or not he's going to be turning pro, which he was already a consummate professional, didn't answer the question directly, just kind of danced around it, saying he's not sure whether or not he's going to come back. Nothing had been made up yet. If you hear anything anybody saying anything, it's not coming from me, that sort of thing. But pretty cool little post-game interview as they wrapped up that first championship.
Yeah, good post-game interview. You sort of saw the personality in Magic Johnson that, we still see today, right? He's been relevant since this day, and on TV consistently, and in our homes. This is sort of the first glimpse probably a lot of people got of, just how magnetic of a personality he had.
Yeah, no question. I was going to say we should go through some outdated stuff, Mike, but I feel like, most of this game there was outdated things that we kind of hit on. Is there anything else that we didn't cover that you had in your notes?
Yeah, so I'm a history guy, as we've been through on this podcast. They were promoting the Mideast Peace Treaty was going to be discussed on the news following the game. So a good late 70s Mideast Peace Treaty I'm always in for. Don't think I didn't spend about 20 minutes down a Google rabbit hole with that during the middle of the game. And then I found interesting, which I did not know, is that they mentioned how John Wooden, before he went to UCLA, coached at Indiana State. So I was not aware of that.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
I knew he was from Indiana, and I knew he played at Purdue, but I did not know that he coached at Indiana State. So that was something new I learned.
A little brief time. He actually coached baseball there as well while he was coaching basketball, just in case you didn't know that. Add one more nugget to the conversation.
I didn't know. So now I'll go on the John Wooden baseball rabbit hole for 20 minutes tonight. So
maybe that's a good show in and of itself, is John Wooden's baseball coaching career. We'll see how that goes.
And then a connection, of course, between Dick Enberg and John Wooden and UCLA. Dick Enberg made his name as an announcer first, doing the play-by-play for those old UCLA teams.
There you go, tying it all together.
Yep.
Let's see. Both these programs, we know what both these guys, Bird and Magic, did, and kind of where these programs have been. Michigan State kind of rose from this point forward into becoming a national power. Indiana State still they've had a couple of good years, but nothing close to a team that they had this 78-79 season. But this is an all-time classic. Watching these two guys play, they did seem like different players. You can kind of see flashes of their greatness, but in this era of no three-point line and the rims being as hard as a rock, and these guys still kind of developing their game, I think, a little bit. It was kind of cool seeing them raw, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
You saw you're right. You hit it right on the head. You saw flashes of what they were going to become, but the NBA game fit their playing style so well. I think that's why they exploded.
That's a good
more
point, yeah.
more of an open game. You get the 3-point shot involved. It spreads things out a little more, and it just fit their game so much more than the college game. Like you mentioned, you could see the flashes, but they were still developing and very quickly, once they exploded on the scene, once they got in the NBA, both these guys, you would see how the NBA game sort of fit their games a lot better than college did. I saw kind of equated to, I'm not comparing him to Bird and Magic, but remember like Vince Carter, no one knew what he was going to be until he got into the NBA. Kind of along the same lines, where it just surprises you, like, wow, their games are completely different in this game than when you saw them with the Lakers and the Celtics.
Yeah, the games just fit the NBA perfectly. So all around good game. I'm glad we went back and watched it. Glad to kind of check that one off the bucket list in terms of games that we've never seen before that we can add to it. Where would you kind of rate this one, though, in terms of like games that we've done? Outside of just knowing it was Bird and Magic, game wise, is this one down the list for you like it is for me?
Yeah, its significance was really high. The game itself was not that great.
Yeah,
but it's what this would be the precursor to with these guys and their rivalry throughout the 80s and then basically saving the NBA. That's the other facet to this that I think was more interesting from a basketball perspective. But hey, look, Ben, we had to do this game, right? The highest rated college basketball game ever with, two of the best college basketball players ever and two of the best basketball players, period, ever. It was one we had to do, and I'm glad we did. The broadcast itself was pretty cool. So, yeah,
it's definitely worth watching. If you haven't watched it before, visit us, distantreplaypodcast.com. We'll put the video there. Again, it's in its entirety. You can watch the full game, even with a little bit of pregame coverage. Just a little hair post-game coverage as well, but it's definitely worth going back and watching just for the fact that you can watch a college basketball tournament game on NBC with the pre-peacock logo. It's a pretty crazy look indeed. So let's close it up on that note. There's still a lot of episodes to come. We got a lot already planned out. So if you haven't subscribed, please do. Got some true crime coming. Going to start doing some more documentary recaps as well, going back to the history of sports in general, some big moments, big players, that sort of thing. That's what we'll continue doing. And if you have any recommendations, anything you want to hear us go through, especially in terms of true crime, we've had some great recommendations that are on Mike's list. Send them to us. We will put them on our list and make them a part of the show as we move forward. But again, online, distantreplaypodcast.com, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Hit subscribe, rate and review, share the podcast, all those things, right, Mike?
Absolutely. And I bet you can't say pre-peacock 5 times fast. Until next time.